Hey y'all, let's sew up a roller derby bralette. These are my two fronts, my back piece, I'm doing the razorback option, and my underband elastic, I'm doing the exposed elastic option. I'm doing the lower neckline too, if you're just curious. Using this cotton spandex, it is a little bit difficult to tell right and wrong sides, so I'll make sure to say that when I'm sewing it up and pinning it up as well. I love cotton spandex for a bralette. I think it's super comfortable, super breathable. It's always got, well, I guess not always got great spandex and recovery, but most of the time you're pretty safe buying a cotton spandex and getting good quality. I have my front main piece face up, my back piece face down, and now I'm going to do my front lining piece face down. And we're going to pin those at the shoulders all together. Make sure you get them nice and perfect at the 3/8 seam allowance when you're pinning, instead of worrying about the edges so much. Right where your needle is going to hit for that 3/8 inch seam is where you really want to pay attention to. In the tutorial, it has you stitch these as your first step. When I'm actually sewing them, I go ahead and pin up my side seams as well, because you're going to want to leave all your pieces exactly how they are. So it's really easy to just go ahead and pin your side seams now. Again, leaving your front main piece facing up, your back piece facing down, and your lining front piece facing down. I'm going to pin at both side seams, all 3 layers. You can use a power mesh here as well. If you're using a power mesh, I suggest basting the power mesh to your lining piece, the wrong side of your lining piece, and then just treating it as one the rest of the time. If you're doing a lounge set, I don't really recommend using power mesh. If you're wanting a sports bra, then yes, power mesh. It's definitely a great thing to add in if you're wanting a sports bra type fit and look. The lower neckline is definitely not meant to be used with power mesh. It's a very low cut neckline, and if you add in power mesh, I do not think there's enough vertical stretch to even cover the most important bits that you're going to want covered. So I added that in the tutorial as well, but just make sure if you're doing the lower neckline, I do not recommend adding in power mesh. You need all that vertical stretch. The power mesh takes away vertical stretch, means it kind of holds you closer and tighter to your body. It kind of smushes you like a sports bra will. It helps with the bounce because there's not as much vertical stretch, so there's a little bit more support there. So if you're planning on doing a sporty swimsuit or something and you want a little more support and a little help with the bounce, power mesh is the way to go. Just make sure you pair it with the higher neckline. And I'm just sewing all 4 seams we just pinned up. I'm using my serger and I'm just trimming off 1/8 of an inch because it's a 3/8 inch seam allowance on this bralette. You can also use whatever is your favorite stretch stitch for construction on your regular sewing machine. I chained them, so I'm just chopping in between the chains here. And now you can flip it right sides out. Mine's a little bit confusing because I did use the same for the main and the lining. So it's a little hard to tell, but it does make a beautiful finish on the inside and outside. No seams are going to be touching you on the side seams, which is always nice. I highly recommend taking the time to baste your front pieces together now, especially if you're using a thinner fold over elastic. I'm going to be using a 3/4 inch fold over elastic, but even then with that thicker fold over elastic, I think it's well worth the time to baste the front edges together. If you don't and they slip and they slide, you can end up with like wrinkles in your front pieces where, you know, one is slightly smaller than the other or has shifted, and there's no getting those out once they're in, once you've sewn it up that way. So I love to take the time to just baste. I use a really small seam allowance, about 1/8 of an inch, and just baste right at the very edge along the front arm size and the front neckline. And I'm just taking my time to trim any other serger threads. I'm going to speed this up a little bit, otherwise it's going to be nice and boring as I just sit and baste them together. Now I'm going to baste along the bottom edge around the entire front and back at 3/8 inch seam allowance. That is only if you're doing the exposed elastic. If you're doing the knit band, you just can baste along the bottom edge just like you did along the neckline and arm side. If you're doing the exposed elastic like me, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I was just straightening up that little edge right there. You're going to do a really wide and very short zigzag. Here's my settings that I like. My older machine didn't go this wide, but I just like to make it almost as wide as it can possibly go. This new machine can go quite wide. I find 8 is plenty wide enough. You just want it where it looks nice and secure. This band is pretty tight on the underbust and it has to stretch over your shoulders, so it is going to get quite a lot of tugging and pulling, so you really want to make sure this is a really secure little seam right here. Make sure you're using a stretch needle so you're not putting holes in your elastic, and so that your machine doesn't throw a hissy fit when you try to sew through this very, very spandexy elastic. Stretch needle. Now we're going to mark it into even quarters. And we're going to do the same with our bralette as well. Make sure you're not using the side seams on your bralette as a quarter marking. The front of the bralette is wider than the back, so your quarter marks will be somewhere towards the front of the bralette, not on those little seams. So make sure you mark the front and the back. I always do this when I'm cutting it out on the fold. Just mark a quick little notch. I highly recommend that. And then walking it out to wherever the quarter marking is. And if you can see my side seam right there, it is not on that side seam. So make sure you're actually finding that quarter marking on here. Otherwise, your back will feel kind of loose and you'll have to stretch it quite a bit along the front. Now we're going to follow that 3/8 inch basting stitch that we did along the whole bottom edge, and we're going to overlap our elastic. This is so funny, y'all, because I could not decide which way my elastic should go. So I made a matching pair of underwear and I just could not decide if I wanted it to have the little red lines on the bottom, because that's how I did it on the shorts, or if it should be flipped and the red line should be whatever is closest to the gray fabric. And I panicked here for a minute. See, so I knew for sure when I did the bottoms that I wanted the red lines on the bottom. So I couldn't decide if I wanted it to match or if it should mirror it. You can let me know what you think I should have done. Obviously, I've already chosen, so hopefully you chose the same as me. But this was a serious decision, y'all. It took me quite a long time, as you can see. I decided to mirror it. And it's funny because I did another set with kind of fancy elastic like this that had stripes. and I did it the other way on it without even thinking. So I guess either way is right. But for this one, I decided to mirror it and put the stripes close to the gray fabric on both. But you're just going to align the edge, the top edge of your elastic along that 3/8 inch basted line. Your elastic should be the same circumference as the bottom of your bralette. You might feel like you're stretching it a little bit, but that's just because the elastic is much more stable than your fabric for your bralette is going to be. So if you're feeling like you're stretching either, go back and check your pieces. It should be about 1-to-1. I'm going to speed this up a little bit because I am pretty meticulous on making sure I'm aligning that edge perfectly to that basted seam, and you're going to get quite bored watching me just pin this along. Now we're ready to attach it. You can use whatever your favorite high stretch top stitch is. It does really need to be a high stretch stitch. This underband area gets a lot of stretching getting on and off the shoulders. So one of my favorite is a triple step zigzag. The one that I'm using here is just like that, except for it's a wave instead of a sharper zigzag. On my machine, it's labeled as elastic stitch. You can also use a cover stitch machine. I would recommend using a woolly nylon or a stretch thread in your lower looper though, if you're going to use a cover stitch machine, or just test it out. Take a scrap of your elastic, do your top stitch, and then stretch your elastic to the max. Make sure your stitch that you're choosing can in fact stretch all the way that your elastic can. Otherwise, when you're putting this on and off, you might pop stitches because it does need to stretch quite a bit. So again, I'm going to speed this up a little bit. All I'm doing is edge stitching along the top edge of my elastic to the bralette, going nice and slow. A lot of high stretch stitches like the triple step zigzag and this elastic stitch take a lot of little stitches, but that's what makes it super stretchy. So let the machine go slow. Don't force it. Don't try to speed it up. Your stitches won't be as pretty, and you shouldn't need to stretch anything. You might feel like you need to put a little bit of tension on it since the elastic is much more stable. So you can add some tension to the front and back of the elastic while it's feeding through, but make sure you let your machine naturally feed your elastic through. Now I'm just removing those basting stitches that I put 3/8 inch away to align my elastic to. It should be really easy. It's only through, 1 or 2 layers of fabric, and it's stretchy, so you can actually just stretch your fabric and they should pop. It's really quick and easy. I highly recommend taking that tiny bit of time to run that basting stitch and have that super nice visual where to align your elastic. It makes it so much easier, and it comes out beautiful every time. Okay. If you have more of your seam allowance left after your stitch, you can trim your seam allowance above your stitch, or below your stitch, I guess. I always have my notches at the front and the back, just like this, because I like to mark them with a notch. Depending on how wide your stitch is, you might have some. See, I have a tiny bit here that I can trim off all along. Really picky about this. I do not like to leave this tiny bit. I like to trim it nice and close. Of course, you want to be super careful. You can use the duck build scissors are actually the best for this. I used whatever scissors were very close to me. These are super sharp though and pretty small, but you do want to be super careful. You don't want to accidentally snip any of your stitches, your fabric, your elastic, anything like that. The reason why I really hate leaving that little seam allowance is because it will roll, and yes, it's only a tiny bit, but I am queen of comfort, and if I'm making this bralette, I want it to be comfortable, and I don't want that extra fabric rolling and bothering me. So if you're picky like me, take the time to trim off any little extra you might have. I find it more important on the front too, since there's 2 layers versus the back where there's only one. But I take my time and go around the whole thing. All right, now fold over elastic. I'm using 3/4 inch elastic. It's my favorite width to use. I think it's the easiest and it looks really cute. I'm going to show you the way that I do it. So I overlap my center. I have a notch there, like always. I'm trimming my notch off, but I have overlapped it about 3/8 of an inch. And I'm going to sandwich it with the raw edge at the fold line. And I'm going to go around stitching this 1-to-1 along the neckline. You will feel like you need to tug a little bit around the rounded corner points, like the rounded part of the neckline. You'll need to tug just a tiny bit, not much. If you tug too much, it's gonna want to kind of cut into your bust and give you a little muffin action. Just be 1-to-1. I do give measurements in the tutorial for what this edge is. That is what the fold over elastic measurement is in the tutorial. It is, I just picked up these lines where you are attaching it and gave that exact measurement. You do want to add it 1-to-1, but I highly suggest feeling it out. Every fold over elastic is different, especially the difference between a super thin 5/8 elastic and a super thick 1-inch fold over elastic. They're very, very different. They're going to behave very different. And you can use either one, whatever you like the look of, the feel of. Joann's even has a 1-inch elastic, fold over elastic, that is literally an elastic with a fold line. It's very thick and it's a very, very strong recovery. I used it for my swimwear one when I did the roller derby one as swimwear because I wanted the elastic super stable. I didn't want that thing sliding around. For my underwear sets, I used this much, much thinner, softer, more comfortable 3/4 inch fold over elastic and is perfect for a little nighttime set. Now what you can do here is measure out the rest, stop stitching, and stitch your fold over elastic right sides together to have a nice closed seam. When I'm using my sewing machine, that is what I do. When I use my cover stitch machine though, I really don't like to stop and start. So what I do is I fold under my fold over elastic and then stitch it like that. Let me zoom in a little closer. Hopefully you can see I just fold under the raw edge and then fold it on top, just like this. So it is overlapping some, and my raw edge is folded under. I only do it this way on a cover stitch machine. I really hate stopping and starting on a cover stitch machine. On my regular machine, I will stop stitching, stitch the two together, and then continue stitching so it's more like in the round. If you're just beginning with fold over elastic and you're a little intimidated by sandwiching and going at it like this, you can always baste it open with the edge of the fabric aligned to the fold line first, then fold over the elastic and do your final stitch. Just popping my previously basted stitches. If you forget to do that, the first time you put it on, it can feel really tight and you can pop stitches and you're like, ah! So I try to remember to do it while I'm sewing. I'm just gonna repeat this exact same method on the 2 arm size and then we're gonna be done. If you want to press your fold over elastic, which I do recommend, make sure you do a low heat and a pressing cloth because they can scorch very easily. Here's my matching little set. I hope you're happy with yours as well. Don't forget to share with us. Bye, y'all.